Now we're going to be taking a look at how to implement the brass ensemble. I started off with some tubas in staccato velocity. So just to remind you what staccato velocity does is as you play higher in velocity, so as you hit the note harder, it does increase in dynamic, which means it increases in the amount of instruments playing. Let me show you. Of course, more instruments playing means more volume as well. Let's have a listen to the riff that I put in. And then towards the end I put this in. And this is just to accentuate different parts of the phrase. Now let's listen to it in context. Okay, now one of my issues with this brass ensemble tuba section is that it sticks out too much. So what I've done is I've gone over to the mixer and used the EQ to pull down some of the low frequencies, but then reboost some of the mids to balance it out. So let's have a listen with and without the EQ. And without. As satisfying as those lows are, and they sound fantastic, they are just taking up a little bit too much room. The other thing I added was this far cathedral reverb, which puts them really, really, really into the background and makes them more part of the atmosphere, so they're not taking over and becoming dominant. I'm not trying to make them the focus, I'm just using them to aid a bit of movement throughout this progression. So let's pull that down a little bit. And that gives them a slightly more epic feel. Let's have a listen to that in context. Now, I'm also not too keen on the change in volume, so what I can do is use the compressor, let's solo that, and let's make sure the ratio is nice and low. Keep the attack at about where it is and the release where it is. Let's see if we can engage that threshold. So the more I pull the threshold down, the more compression we'll hear. So we'll pull that down just a little bit, kind of overdo it so slightly, see if that makes a difference, and then take it from there. That controls it really nicely. Again, just one more time in context, we'll just take the last one. Great, so it doesn't pop out too much. Now, next up, I added some swells, and I did this using the trombone. So I changed the articulation to swell, of course, and we get this nice crescendo and then decrescendo in volume. I felt that this was really necessary to help glue some of the sections together again and add a little bit more movement where you don't necessarily expect it. The swell happens at the end of the second bar and then kind of towards the 8th bar, but not right towards the end where you would expect that increase in volume. It just helps bring in the other instruments in a really natural way. Let's have a listen to it soloed first. Really loving how that sounds. Now let's have a listen to it in context over the first and second section. Notice how the note goes on even after it stopped playing. So you can use the release just to tighten this up ever so slightly. I just felt like I didn't really want that overhang. I kind of wanted it to come off when I told it to come off. So now, comes off a little bit quicker. I think we could do it even more so. Much better. That's going to give us the control that we need. In the second half, I just felt like this first section didn't glue into the second section. So I added another trombone, which was just sustained. So nothing exciting there, or nothing too exciting there anyway, with a little bit of release. And I felt that just helped glue the swells together. So let's play the swells and the sustained trombone. Now, when they're playing alone, it sounds a little bit awkward, but in context, sounds fantastic. Really love what that's adding. Next up, I also added some trumpets to this section just to bring it up even more, and I felt like the brass section was just missing something in the higher frequencies. Let's have a quick listen soloed. Now you can hear the parts growing in volume and dynamic, and that's because of this modulation automation that I did. You probably saw the dynamics wheel coming up as well. So let's hear that in context. Look at that dynamics wheel coming up throughout the section. Notice how it helps build that energy. Fantastic. For the next section, I had a little bit of trouble with this, but I wanted to experiment with one of the horn modes. Now, what I did to start off with was set a little articulation trigger because it changes about a quarter of the way through. It starts off with sustained single tongue, which sounds like this. This kind of tension building feel. And then it changes to sustained. Well, you'll see it change if I play here. Solo that. So all the way through. And this goes on and on to the end. I just felt like I wanted to build a bit of tension in this first place. It didn't turn out exactly how I wanted it to. I felt it was a bit messy, and that is because I have some other plucks going on, so you can't hear the horns really playing by themselves. But if I mute those, let's see if they stick out like we want them to. To be honest, the sustain pattern sounds a little bit better, but I wanted to experiment for you guys. I wanted to have a go at using these different articulations so you could maybe have an idea of where you would like to put them. Each of those articulations adds a different amount of energy. Now, you can also go in and change things in the mix and the microphone and so on. My advice would be get everything sounding how you want it to first, and then you can be pernickety later. One thing that I do recommend you do at some point is a little bit of panning. So putting things to the left and to the right just helps give a slightly bigger stereo image and pockets the sounds a little bit more. Now have a listen to these horns and how they kind of poke out in a nice way throughout the mix, so they're not just traveling down the middle, perfectly balanced in that stereo image. I'm trying to knock things off course a little bit. And if you were in a cinema, you'd want that kind of movement of sound from one side to the other, transporting you through that three-dimensional space. And there you have it. Don't worry, I know the space feels a little bit empty. I am going to be adding some of the woodwind to help bring it back to life. So that's what's going to be happening in the next video. Woodwind, and then after that, some percussion. Make sure you experiment. Enjoy yourselves.